Chapter 775 Trap. As I drew closer to the tower, a palpable sense of oppression filled the air. Whispers, hisses, and eerie moans could be heard emanating from within, and the very ground seemed to pulse with demonic energy. It didn't bother me very much since my blood was mixed with demon blood. Rather, I felt quite comfortable. The same couldn't be said for the others. "Are you guys okay? We can take a rest if you want. It's not like we have to rush directly." Their conditions were quite worrying. It wasn't so much for Jean and Amanda, who were somewhat accustomed to the demonic energy due to their experience in Kamank Hut, but the same couldn't be said for Emma. Her complexion was rather pale and her breath was stagnant. The only one that seemed to be completely fine was Liam. I wasn't surprised though. He had spent quite a few years in the demon realm, where the demonic energy was as thick as it could be. Compared to what he had experienced back then, this was child's play. I'm good," Emma muttered, looking around and clenching her teeth. Judging from her expression, I could tell that she had realized that she was the only one struggling and was just trying not to be a burden. "You know, if you're worried about being a burden, then don't be. You'd be a burden if you carried on right now and got tired later when it truly matters." As if her inner thoughts were exposed, Emma's face changed and her mouth closed. She looked around for a moment and sat down. "All right, I'm sorry. Don't be." Thankfully, she wasn't stubborn about the matter and sat down. I unknowingly smiled when I saw that and turned my attention back toward the tower that was only a couple of kilometers away from us. The journey to the tower so far was unobstructed. Although there were a few guards patrolling the area, it wasn't something that posed any trouble for us. Aside from Liam and I, everyone else was around S+. We were amongst the strongest in the human domain, and thus only someone of the Duke rank would actually have a chance at finding us. And with me here, avoiding Duke rank demons was rather easy. Thus, our journey to the tower was nothing short of easy. "Do you have a way to get into the tower?" Jin's words reached my ears and I turned to look at him. Calmly staring at the tower in the distance, I patted him on the shoulder. "Don't worry, it shouldn't be too much of a problem." I turned to look at Emma. Her complexion was slowly recovering, and with Amanda by her side, she seemed to be in high spirits. "So long as we reach the tower, we'll easily be able to enter." That was the goal. They've almost reached the tower. Prince Plintus stood atop a tall building, his sharp gaze fixated on the orb in his hand. Around him stood a group of powerful demons, their ranks ranging from Duke to Marquis. Though their presence was not as overwhelming as the prince's, their strength could not be ignored. They were the elite forces of the city, and they had been following the movements of a group of humans for quite a while. As they watched the humans approach the tower, the demons couldn't help but chuckle. In their eyes, the humans were like rats walking into a trap. "Prince, how about we attack now?" One of the demons, Duke Camilla, suggested while staring at the orb. His aura was faintly similar to the prince's, but it was clear that he was still on the verge of breaking through to prince rank. But Prince Plintus shook his head, a small frown creasing his features. He knew that attacking now would be too hasty. That he had a plan. Lowering the orb, he turned his gaze to the tower. His eyes flickered as he considered the situation. Lowering the security of the tower was a risky move, but he knew it was the best way to ambush the humans. The moment they entered, they'd be able to block them from all sides and stop them from escaping. Even if they had some sort of trump cards in their pockets, they wouldn't be able to use them once they entered the tower due to the highly sophisticated safety devices that had been installed. That being said, it also stored certain items and artifacts that were rather fragile. It'd be a real pity if those broke. No, rather than pity, it'd be a real pain. Prince Plintus's nose wrinkled in thought as he contemplated his next move. "Lower the security of the tower," he said finally. "Let them enter." The demons were taken aback by the sudden suggestion. They knew the artifacts inside the tower were incredibly sensitive and valuable. If something were to happen to them, it could be devastating for the city. "Prince, you need to reconsider. You, of all people, should know just how important the tower is. If something were to go wrong, the consequence would be catastrophic." Duke Camilla voiced his concerns, but Prince Plintus silenced him with a single glance. "Ugh." The Duke felt a tremendous pressure wash over him and he instantly quieted down. The pressure he was subjected to made him unable to speak, and a realization dawned on him. Even if he were to reach prince rank, he would be no match for Prince Plintus. Fiddling with the orb in his hand, Prince Plintus continued. I understand your concerns, but there's no better place to ambush them than the tower. It'll be impossible for them to get out once they're in." The demons exchanged hesitant glances, unsure of whether to trust the prince's plan. But they knew that Prince Plintus was a cunning demon, and they ultimately decided to follow his lead. They also somewhat agreed with him. It was just that the consequences of their failure made them a little hesitant. Understood. As the sun continued to set, the group of demons moved towards the tower, ready to carry out Prince Plintus's plan. The humans were about to step into a trap, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. All they needed to do was close the trap that they had so intricately set up. "Have you recovered enough?" "Yeah, I'm good now." Seeing Emma's complexion return to normal, I breathed a sigh of relief and turned to look at the others. It looks like it was a good idea to take a rest. Though they didn't show it, they also seemed to have benefited from the break, as their eyes seemed more clear. Without further ado, I tore my gaze away from them and once again shifted my attention toward the enormous tower in the distance. Licking my lips, I pressed my foot forward and rushed toward it. Swoosh. As I had done previously, I positioned myself at the very front and looked around to see if there were any Duke-ranked demons nearby. There seems to be a couple of Duke-ranked demons not far from here. Whenever I spotted them, I'd alter the direction we were going to avoid them. While I somewhat believed that there was a high chance we could avoid their detection, I didn't want to risk things. I decided to be on the cautious side and avoided their range of detection. Our trip was significantly slowed down as a result of this, but given that we weren't in a particularly urgent race against the clock, we were able to accommodate delays of this magnitude. And we soon arrived near the gate. It took us about an hour to reach it from the spot where we took a rest, but it was well worth it. "What should we do now?" Liam asked, appearing right next to me. I didn't respond to him immediately and focused my attention on the gate in the distance. It was fairly large and was currently guarded by several marquee-ranked demons. "I think that's the best option." I massaged my chin and continued to observe the demons that stood next to the gate. Although they were marquee-ranked demons, they weren't very strong. At most around S1 and thus weren't a big problem. The problem was inside, as I could feel the presence of a particularly powerful entity. They were Duke-ranked, and although they weren't a threat to me, I knew that killing them quietly was not a real option. The strategy is straightforward. Once inside, we will hunt down and destroy the demons as quickly as we can. Our objective is to get rid of the mana compressor. As long as we are successful in destroying that, the barrier will vanish and we will be able to begin our assault. I seriously looked at the others. Ideally, I want to do this as quietly as possible, but if something goes wrong, I'll attract their attention and you guys destroy the mana compressor. My eyes wandered to Liam and I stopped there. If there was someone I trusted with taking care of their safety, it was him. So long as he was there, I didn't feel worried. After all, his talent was absurd. He had already reached SS rank, and the craziest thing was that he had no cheat to help him get there. Well, he himself was a cheat. While I was massaging my hands, I stole a quick glance at the others before turning my attention once again to the demons that were off in the distance. My vision soon blurred. Let's go. Chapter 776 Trap 2. They have started their attack. Duke Kamala's voice reached the prince's ears and his eyes came to a gradual close. His thoughts were unknown and everyone's attention focused on him. The humans had made a dash for the tower, and they were now all waiting for the prince's orders. Should we? No, not yet. The prince shook his head, putting the orb away. Now that he knew where they were, he no longer needed to pay them any attention. The orb consumed quite a bit of demonic energy and he needed to conserve it as much as possible. Even though their opponents were trapped, they weren't individuals they could make light of. Each and every one of them was strong. Especially the boy called Ren. He was very dangerous. With that being said, get into positions. We will start out attack soon. He wasn't scared of him. Although Ren was strong, so was he. He was rather confident in his strength and didn't think he'd lose out to that human. In fact, he was confident he could beat him even without the need to ambush him. Last he'd heard, the human wasn't even prince ranked yet. Still, it's best to be careful. You might never know what might happen. Though Prince Plintus was confident, he wasn't one to let confidence get the best of him. He was a meticulous individual and wasn't one that let anything slip his mind. Thinking of something, he took the orb once again and injected demonic energy into it. Instantly, images appeared on the orb and he flipped through them. Good, it looks like they are still there. What he was currently looking at were the human forces that were waiting outside of the city. He wanted to see if they were making any strange movements, but it looks like he had worried too much. They were still there doing nothing. Good. He put the orb away, casting one of his worries away. After that, he returned his attention back toward the tower and smiled. I think enough time has already passed. How about we greet our guests? His words immediately stirred the minds of the demons and they all smiled. Following this, their wings expanded and they disappeared from the spot they were in, reappearing right in front of the tower. Have the others block the other entrances and get ready to set up the mana disruptors. Prince Plintus ordered. Understood. There were a lot of things he had planned out for this moment. Since he was dealing with tough opponents, he made sure to spare nothing for the current trap. From mana disruptors to all sorts of artifacts that could impede their movements and attack them from the distance, he spared nothing. So long as he managed to defeat them, the war was as good as over. Perhaps he could even be rewarded by his majesty. If that was the case. Hee. Prince Plintus laughed to himself before casting a glance toward the demons behind him. Wait for me here. Once I give out the signal, you can come in. He didn't wait for their replies and made his way into the tower. His steps were leisurely, unbefitting of someone that was about to ambush someone, and when he passed the gate and looked at the broken shards that laid on the ground as remnants of the corps of guards, his expression crumbled a little. Useless. They were supposed to be special elites that they had trained arduously over the years, but for them to die such deaths, he could only feel disgusted. A pity that they had gone up against a powerful foe. A small sacrifice to pay for the greater good. It didn't take long for his expression to return to normal and he entered the tower. The insides of the tower were dimly lit by torches that rested by the side of the dark walls, and following a narrow corridor was a magnificent hall. Unlike the corridor, it was well lit by the enormous black windows that stood above and the large torches that hung beside the enormous black pillars that supported the structure. A red carpet enveloped the entire floor, and what stood out the most about the room was the throne that sat in the middle of the hall. It was made out of obsidian and was adorned with rubies and emeralds that gleamed menacingly under the lighting of the hall. It was a throne Prince Plintus was all too familiar with. After all, it belonged to him. At the moment, however, it was occupied by a certain someone. With his legs lazily resting on the armrest of the throne and his cheek supported by his fist, he fiddled with a small black orb in his hand. Beside him were 4 other humans and Prince Plintus's feet came to a sudden pause. His nose wrinkled at the sight. You finally came? A leisurely voice reverberated through the hall, and Prince Plintus's body stiffened. He had a bad feeling about the situation. Without thinking, he took out the orb and channeled his demonic energy into it. Mages surfaced within the sphere and he quickly looked through them. Seconds passed and hundreds of images flashed across the orb. It wasn't long before Prince Plintus's expression relaxed and he put the orb away. For a moment there, I thought you had me fooled. Prince Plintus's gaze fell on the human that sat on the throne. From how leisurely his expression had been, he had mistakenly assumed that he had done something, but when he checked with the orb, he found that everything was still as it was before. The humans were outside of the city and his forces were blocking every entrance. It looks like you've figured out the situation that you're in? Prince Plintus smiled. It was a smile that hid the nervousness that had previously been displayed and one that was filled with rage. He had made a fool of himself. He calmly observed the human that was still leisurely lying down on his throne. From his expression, he didn't seem quite to understand the situation he was in. That's fine. Prince Plintus's smile grew and his hand raised. Rumble-ay, rumble-ay. The hall shook and the air started to twist. Immediately, the mana that lingered in the air vanished out of thin air, sucked by a small vortex above the room. The expression of the humans opposite him changed, and Prince Plintus looked even more pleased. That wasn't all. Swoosh, swoosh. One after another, demons started to appear beside him. Their entire aura covered the room and the room trembled even more. There were over 100 demons present in the room, and their presence overwhelmed the ones that belonged to the humans opposite him. Even Rin, the one that gave off the strongest presence. The sight pleased the prince as his smile grew even wider and his gaze fell on Rin. Do you finally understand what situation you're in? How is it? The prince looked at the demons around him. Are you impressed by what you're seeing? The human didn't answer. He just looked at the demons with an expressionless look. He was still lying down on his seat, but to Prince Plintus, his silence meant a lot of words. You didn't expect to be fooled into a trap, did you? From the very moment that you arrived here, I knew your every movement. For someone that's supposed to lead the humans, you're quite careless. How was it that someone who was known to be meticulous and careful did not suspect a thing when coming into the city and notice just how easy it was to infiltrate the place? The fact disappointed the prince to no end, as he thought he'd be smarter than this. Although your plan to destroy the mana compressor isn't unreasonable, do you really think you would have made it this far if it wasn't for us making this easier for you? He laughed. You fool, the only reason you even made it this far is because we let you. It was his laugh that set off a chain reaction of laughter from the other demons, who all laughed in response. Fools, we knew everything from the start. Ah, these fools. Only now do they realize that we were watching their every movement from the start. They believed they were clever, but in reality they are nothing more than rats falling for our traps. The entire hall was filled with waves of laughter and ridicule as it spread throughout the room. Demons continued to make fun of the situation while the prince stood back and smiled broadly as he watched the show. But just as he was about to speak again, a soft voice echoed within the ears of everyone present. I fell for your trap? Sir. Crack. He clenched his hand and the orb in his hand shattered. Instantaneously, a deluge of mana engulfed the space, and it immediately began to congregate in the area close to him. Whammy. In a matter of seconds, thin threads of mana began to twirl and twist in front of everyone's eyes, and it wasn't long before something that eerily resembled a portal appeared. The space twisted, and then, much to the surprise of all the demons who were there, a portal appeared in the region that was adjacent to him. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. On top of that, one figure after another began to materialize from it, making the situation even dire. They were figures they were all familiar with, and the expressions of the demons present changed for the worse. This was especially so for Prince Plintus, who looked as if he had swallowed a bug. A crushing pressure that was many times more powerful than what the demons let out permeated the hall, which had previously been filled with laughter and ridicule from earlier in the day. That. After taking a step back, Prince Plintus was startled to find that he was unable to continue forward. When he turned around, he saw that he was standing with his back against one of the pillars in the hallway. Thank you very much. A whisper made its way into his ear, sending shivers down his body. Before he had a chance to say anything else, the whisper reached his ear once more. Thank you for being so easy to predict. Chapter 777 Trap 3. Following Kevin's death, a lot of things changed. I was able to gain access to all of Kevin's powers. I was promoted to the role of Alliance Head, and I learned the truth about what was going on behind the scenes. In tandem with that, my rank improved, and although I did not inherit his system, I did obtain access to the abilities that he had previously possessed. And one of these abilities was the ability to create portals that connected to different planets. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Figures continued to appear beside me. People like Octavius, Monica, Donna, Douglas, and Ivana, basically the most powerful people in the human domain, were among those I knew very well and counted among them. Wow, these are a lot of demons. Ho ho. You really did bring us to a nice show. The plan was rather simple. Create a portal, send everyone to Amora, infiltrate the city, open the portal, kill the demons, go home. It was a fairly simple plan. One that didn't take a genius to understand. That being said, it wasn't as easy as it sounded. If I had to be completely truthful, I would say that sneaking into the city was the most difficult part of the mission. Even though I was quite powerful, snaking past over a couple of dozen demons with the rank of Duke and one demon with the rank of Prince was a task that was challenging for even me to complete. I wasn't entirely confident I could do it, but what if the demons were aware of my every move and made it their mission to make things simpler for me and the others? What if I purposely set up dummies outside, masked as the forces of the human domain, and tricked them into letting us into the city and their main tower so that they could trap us? If that were the case, wouldn't everything be solved? Thank you very much. I whispered gratefully, looking at the prince-ranked demon in the distance. His complexion was rather pale and the sight made me smile. Thank you for being easy to predict. It should not have been surprising that, out of the trillions of lives that existed in the universe, a few of those lives would have been born with incredible potential. One that was far superior to that of their contemporaries and elevated them above the rest. In fact, it would be more surprising if such individuals didn't exist. Regardless of race, There would always be a few who were born above the others. A special one. It was how the universe worked. And it was something it knew very well, hence the existence of the protectors. They were the antibodies of the universe, with their sole role being to eliminate or stunt the growth of these so-called special ones. For 13.7 billion years, the protectors had been faithfully carrying out their job. They infiltrated many races and secretly took control of them. Whenever one such special one appeared, they'd do their best to stunt their growth, and if nothing worked, they'd eliminate them. Just like a brain couldn't control everything that was going on inside, the same was true for the records. The records, despite all their power, couldn't control what was within the universe. The races that lived within and the special ones that appeared. It was the responsibility of the protectors to make sure that everything ran smoothly, and if a particular race displayed an excessive amount of potential or upset the equilibrium that they had created, they'd do everything in their power to eradicate it. Such was what happened to the demon race many years ago. Or so how things were supposed to have happened. Boom! A figure flew across the space, bits of metal trailing the area in which they flew. Judging from the intricate runes that were in the shards of metal, they seemed to belong to a piece of armor that had now been torn into shreds. Finally stabilizing its body, the figure was revealed to be a bulky, golden-haired, gold-eyed male. He was one such protector. How? As the protector looked off into the distance, where a figure with white hair stood, his voice conveyed an obvious sense of distress. He watched as the white-haired figure, Jezebeth, held another figure in his hand. It was another protector. His grip was tight around the protector's neck as it drooped over his hand and held it firmly in place. How? Jezebeth's cold and leisurely voice reverberated through the space, mimicking the protector's voice. Crack. His hand, which was firmly placed by the throat of the other protector, suddenly tightened, and a golden orb quickly materialized in his grip as golden dust flew in the space around him. Putting it away, Jezebeth turned his head to meet the protector's gaze. Protector of the Seat of Chastity. Jezebeth called out his title and the protector moved back. His face was pale and he was still in shock at the current situation. Just then, he had witnessed the complete and utter annihilation of 5 other protectors, with him being the last of them. He, who was supposed to stand within the pinnacle of the universe, watched as his compatriots were killed one by the one whom they had allowed to get away many years ago. Their biggest mistake. You're shocked, aren't you? Before he knew it, Jezebeth had appeared before him. He was so fast that he couldn't even react on time, and with the injuries he had sustained, he could only watch as his hand firmly grasped against his throat. Kook. The scene seemed eerily similar to one that he had just seen a few moments earlier. How is it possible for me to be alive? How is it possible when all 7 of you have personally shown up to eliminate us all? Jezebeth muttered the questions that had been lingering in his mind ever since. Truly, he couldn't understand. How was it possible for him to still be alive? Even so, back then he was someone insignificant. Even if he did survive, he shouldn't have grown to this point. Have a look at this. Right then, Jezebeth extended his other hand, and a number of shards of metal materialized. They were surrounded by a faint eternal aura, and Jezebeth's expression gradually softened as a result. You want to know how I managed to survive? It's because of this. This is what helped me survive and allowed me to be here today. He slowly clenched his hand, feeling the rough texture of the shards. The sole reason I'm still alive is because of them, and if not for them, I wouldn't be who I am today. Everything started with this cube, but what came after is what truly made all of this happen. Although the cube was the initial spark that set in motion the series of events that led to his ascent to power, his success was primarily due to the fact that he happened upon the planetary seed. Because of that, he was able to mature into the person he was today and assist the demons in regaining their former glory, which would not have been possible without it. A string of events was what allowed everything to occur. One could argue it was fate or a string of coincidences, but Jezebeth didn't care. He had only one goal in mind. Everything else was secondary. Do you want to know why 7 clans exist within us demons? Jezebeth's expressionless gaze turned to the protector. The force at which Jezebeth held his throat tightened, preventing the protector from speaking. A lot of people wonder if it has anything to do with the powers that they possess. It bears a striking resemblance to their representative sin, but despite the fact that this conclusion is in large part accurate, it is not the reason why their clan is named as such. Jezebeth gave a little shake of the head and then raised his head to look at the planet in the distance. The clarity in his eyes began to cloud, and a look of reflection appeared on his face. "What you've done to me," he started. "I remember all of it. From how you massacred my clansmen, my loved ones, and everyone that I care for. I remember all of it." Perhaps unconsciously or consciously, his grip on the protector's throat tightened even further. It was so tight that the protector found himself unable to groan. "Not a single day has passed that I don't remember what you've done to my people, and there hasn't been a single day where I haven't thought about it." His gaze started to clear up at that moment. I thought that what you did should be remembered by every one of us demons. Just like how humans keep all records of those who have heavily sinned in the past, I etched your sins into the demon clans. For each of your virtue, I named a corresponding sin." Jezebeth's eyes gradually shifted to focus on the protector, who was staring back at him with a shaky gaze that spread throughout his body. "You've guessed it." He smiled. "The clans were made with the purpose of eliminating you protectors. They're a reminder of what you've created, and while it's a pity that you couldn't witness their true power, you should rejoice at the fact that the records will soon bear witness to their might." Crack. Like that, with the clench of his hand the last protector died. From this point forward, the protectors were no more. Brilliant particles flew into the space around Jezebeth, and his gaze followed them as they drifted away from him. Raising his hand, he wiped the corner of his mouth where a black liquid trickled. He looked at it for a brief moment before turning his head to face the distance. Toward a familiar planet, one where a special person resided. A smile appeared on his face not long after. "Just wait a little longer. I'll be there soon." Chapter 778, Taking Over 1. Time seemed to pass in seconds. By the time it took for everyone to emerge from the portal, the battle had already begun, and both sides clashed with incredible brutality. Mana pulsated in the air and all sorts of colors flashed across the room. The clear winner was clear to see from the very beginning. While the demons were indeed numerous, their numbers were far smaller than those of the humans that had emerged out of thin air. They had more Duke-ranked demons, but when put against over 1,000 S ranks, they were nothing. Boomy. The hall shook and screams of agony echoed throughout. Blood splattered everywhere, and the tower began to tremble uncontrollably shortly thereafter. Rumble. Oh no. This is bad. Demons were the first to notice the condition of the tower, and their complexions changed instantly upon noticing the change that was happening. Prince Plintus was among them, but I pressed my hand against his shoulder before he could even move. "Let's stay here and have a look, shall we?" His head turned to face me and I returned it with a smile. It was nice to see such a strong demon look so panicked. "Let the others settle the matters. How about the two of us have a nice long chaw?" Swoosh. A fist hurled my way before I could finish my sentence. The air around it twisted and my hair blew back a little. Staring at the approaching fist, my brows furrowed. How rude. I didn't even get the chance to finish my sentence. Smack. Before the fist could reach me, I smacked his forearm, redirecting the fist away from me, at which point he flapped his wings once, vanished from the location he was in, and reappeared at the opposite end of the hall. Where is he going? The most surprising thing was the fact that he vanished yet again, making me think that he had just run away from the fight, and the sight made my frown even deeper. Right. He must be going there. But as soon as I looked around and realized the circumstances, my frown lines began to smooth out again. It's not hard to see that we're winning. With each second passing, a demon would fall. The situation was dire for them, and with the overwhelming numbers we had, the battle was as good as over. What really mattered, however, was suffering the least amount of losses possible. The human domain simply could not afford to lose any of its forces in light of the impending third cataclysm. In particular, because the demons that were approaching were in a category that was far superior to the demons we were currently up against. It's good that they're being careful. Tearing my gaze away from them, I returned my gaze to where the prince-ranked demon had disappeared. If there was one threat, it was him. So long as I was successful in eliminating him, the war would be considered officially won. All right then. I stretched my limbs and pursed my lips. Let's see exactly what you're up to. Prince Plintus was in a state of panic as he made his way through the corridors. Ha. Sweat streamed down his face and his breathing grew increasingly labored. The more he walked, the heavier his legs felt, and the corridor before him seemed to stretch endlessly. Damn it! He cursed under his breath, moving as fast as he could while flapping his wings to propel himself forward, his figure blurring and reappearing in the far distance. A black halo surrounded his body, completely masking his entire presence so that no one could follow him. The prince was confident in his cloaking skills. Even someone of the same level as him would be unable to find him. Swoosh, swoosh. How has this happened? It only dawned on him at this moment that he had fallen for a trap. He initially thought that he was leading the way into the trap, but things had taken a turn for the worst. That power. How is it possible? But what was most shocking about the situation was the human's ability. The one to create portals. That, it shouldn't be something that he could wield. Even he, a prince-ranked demon, was unable to achieve such a feat, and as far as he knew, there was no skill that could grant one such ability. So how was it possible? Huff, huff. Despite being caught off guard, the prince had not given up. He had prepared for this scenario, a scenario he never thought he would have to put into action. He had no choice but to resort to this method. The repercussions of using such a method were grave. The city he had built with so much effort would crumble before his very eyes. He didn't want that, especially since he had put a lot of blood, sweat and tears into building it into what it was today. He constructed it with his majesty in mind, for when the time came that he would at last arrive on Earth. But because of one single occurrence, despite the fact that he had done everything in his power to make the city one of the best there was, he had to force himself to watch it fall apart right in front of his eyes. The thought tore his heart to pieces, but he took comfort in the fact that he would finally be able to kill the human and everything would make itself up. Yes, so long as I can kill him, this price is fine. The prince repeated this thought in his mind, convincing himself that the price was worth it. He passed through a corridor and came to an abrupt halt before a large beacon. A bright light flooded out from it and shot toward a narrow hole atop the ceiling. The demonic energy around the beacon was incredibly dense, and Prince Plintus felt reinvigorated. He knew that the sudden increase in mana density had taken a toll on him and all the other demons in the city. If not for it, they wouldn't have been suffering so much. Prince Plintus gazed at the beacon with complicated eyes, knowing that he had no choice. He closed his eyes and extended his hand. Demonic energy burst out from his hand and enveloped the entire beacon. Suddenly, the demonic energy that lingered in the air twisted dangerously and shot toward the beacon at incredible speeds. Within the span of a couple of seconds, more and more demonic energy started to enter the beacon, and before long the beacon started to shake, leaving behind several creaking sounds. Paga. The prince took a deep breath, staring at the unstable beacon. His eyes trembled at the energy contained within it and his complexion paled. Ugh. This will definitely do. He clenched his teeth and poured more demonic energy into the beacon. It's almost ready. Prince Plintus spat through his clenched teeth. Seeing just how unstable the mana compressor in front of him was, he knew that he was close to destabilizing it. Paga. The beacon started to tremble even more, its sides smacking against the left and right side. The prince knew that he was close to destabilizing it. So long as he destabilized it, he would be able to create a dungeon that would soon desync. By then, a connection with the demon world would be created and monsters would pour in. Their situation would quickly reverse. It was a bold move, one that would bring disastrous consequences to his city, but he had no choice. It was the only way. So that's where it is. Suddenly, a gentle whisper made its way toward the prince's ear, and his entire body stiffened. He wasn't even sure when it had happened, but he soon felt a hand press against the side of his shoulder, and the prince's head robotically turned. How? To his horror, the one person he absolutely did not want to see was standing right next to him, staring at the mana compressor with a look of interest. Without so much as a glance, Ren's mouth parted open, his voice reaching his ears despite the chaos that was happening before them. This is the second time. He slowly turned his head to face him, and their gazes intersected with one another. Why are you so predictable? Chapter 779, Taking Over 2. I took my time finding Prince Plintus. It would be difficult for anyone, including myself, to see through his disguises, given how adept he was at cloaking himself. In fact, standing in front of him and looking at him, I realized that I was being overly confident in my abilities. There was no way I could find him with my abilities. Thankfully, I'm always prepared. Just prior to that, downstairs, when Prince Plintus was still in shock over the situation, I made the most of the opportunity to arrive in front of him and press my hand against his shoulder. I could have sneaked up on him back then and attacked him, but I decided to go with a different strategy instead. Leaving a mark on his body. It was never my intention to kill him. Rather, the goal was to locate the mana compressor and destroy it. I had the opportunity to carry it out after I had Prince Plintus killed, but I chose not to. In all candor, it would have required twice as much time, and in times of war, time was of the essence. I knew, perhaps more than anyone else, that each and every second was important, which was why I chose to proceed in this manner. With the Akashic laws in my command, everything was easy. Placing a thin thread around his body, I was able to find him regardless of his cloaking skills. In my eyes, he was no different than a moving target. Let me guess. I focused my attention on the mana compressor that was right in front of me. It was violently shaking, and the demonic energy in the immediate area around me was in a state of disarray. With a glance, I was able to determine what it was that he was attempting to accomplish. My gaze moved toward Prince Plintus. You're trying to destabilize the mana compressor to create a portal and then desync it? Looks like I'm right. I smiled at the prince's expression. That was enough for me to know that I was right. That's not a bad plan, to be honest. I felt mildly impressed by his attempt. If he had actually constructed a dungeon and then desynced it, then the situation would certainly reverse the way he had hoped it would. Our current advantage does not come from the individual power of a select few, but rather from the strength of our numbers. In terms of their individual power, the demons were significantly more powerful than we were. They had far more Duke-ranked demons than we did for SS ranks. The same couldn't be said for Marquis-ranked demons and S-ranked users. Our advantage lay there, with over 1,000 of them currently in the hall. They were the reason for our high chances of victory, and if not for them, then the ambush would have never worked to begin with. That being said, Prince Plintus had grossly miscalculated something. Not bad. Not bad. I took a step back, away from the mana compressor, and interlocked my hands behind my back. What? I smiled at the prince's expression. He seemed utterly dumbfounded by my actions, and I couldn't really blame him if I had to be honest. With that being said, I didn't really care and continued to observe the mana compressor. What are you doing? Exactly at that moment, I found myself frowning and looking over at Prince Plintus. I gave him a gentle nudge with my head before turning my attention back to the mana compressor. Weren't you trying to create a dungeon? Go, I'm giving you the chance to do it. I promise I won't do a single thing while you inject demonic energy into it. At that very moment, the prince wore a look that could only be described as wonderful. If I could have gotten a few pictures of it, I definitely would have, but I didn't want to push my luck too much. If he snapped, things would turn rather troublesome. Nevertheless, in spite of what I said, Prince Plintus continued to stand in the same place he had been. It was as if he no longer cared to create a dungeon as he had initially intended. Come on. Why aren't? His actions irritated me, and just as I was about to say something else, I felt something being thrown in my direction. It was the tip of a very sharp nail. Swoosh. Wow. I narrowly avoided it and took several steps back. I didn't even have time to properly stabilize my footing before the prince started to attack me again. He came at me with such speed that it made it difficult for me to dodge. Swoosh. 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 His attacks were relentless and extremely ruthless, aiming for my most sensitive organs. His movements were extremely fast, and if not for Eyes of Kronos and the chip inside of my mind, I would have had a hard time dodging them. It looks like he's trying to stall for time and wait for the mana compressor to explode. Well, that's one way of doing things. I didn't know whether to be impressed or disappointed by his actions, but as I stared at the incoming sharp nail, I twisted my foot on the ground and avoided the attack. Then I raised my foot and smashed it against the other hand he was using to attack me. Clank. I stumbled a couple of steps, barely keeping my face from changing. His arm was a lot harder than I originally anticipated. Fwop. Out of nowhere, his figure blurred and I felt someone appear behind me. His movements were so fast that even Eyes of Kronos was barely able to keep up with it. Despite that, I was still able to see it somewhat. It was just enough to let me know what had happened, and I ducked down. Swoosh. A large hand materialized out of thin air in the location where my head had been moments earlier. It reached out like it was going to grab something, but all it could do was grab air. I twisted my body and a sword appeared in my hand. Click. A familiar clicking sound rang out, and a figure hurled all the way back into one of the walls in the distance. Boom. After his figure slammed into the wall, I took a few deep breaths and regained my composure. Everything took place in a split second, and despite the many advantages I possessed, I was having a hard time keeping up with him. He was weaker than Waylon, and not by a small margin, but he was still extremely strong. He wasn't someone I could take lightly. It looks like I still need to get used to my newfound power. In terms of rank, I was a little lower, and as I had only recently gotten to where I was now, I was a little unfamiliar with how to use the power I had. It was only logical that I wasn't accustomed to my power, as some of my body reacted faster than my brain did. A problem which used to be on reverse previously. Still, it's not like I'm using my full power yet. I still hadn't used my demonic transformation or the Akashic laws. One could say that I was going easy on Prince Plintus, and I guess it was true. But considering that my goal was to let the mana compressor desync, I didn't need to go all out. There's no better time than to get used to my powers than now. If one of the reasons why I was having a hard time getting accustomed to my powers was the lack of experience I had with them, then there was no better time than now to gain that experience. Sushi. Just as the dust began to settle, Prince Plintus materialized on the right side of my body. When he came at me with his claws, I was about to duck out of the way when I noticed several small spherical energy beams on the tips of his fingers. Oh shit. When I first saw them, my eyes widened, and instead of ducking, I pulled my sword from its sheath. At that moment, I could feel my muscles tensing up, and I brought my sword parallel to my body, and his claws landed perfectly against my sword at that angle. Bang! The point of contact between my sword and his claws generated waves of circular pressure that spread outward in all directions. Letting out a short groan, I stumbled a couple of steps back. Ugh. I only came to a stop when my back was against the side of a wall, stopping me from moving further back. Just as I was about to collect myself, I became aware of something approaching from my right side. And at that precise moment, my gaze stopped on the mana compressor. Prick, 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 prick. The body of the compressor began to develop cracks, and it began to tremble back and forth between the two extremes. The light that had emerged from the cracks was blindingly bright and white. I was about to move away from the cracks that had formed on the side of the compressor when all of a sudden, Prince Plintus materialized in front of me. Where are you going? A gleeful smile was plastered across his face, despite the manic expression that he was sporting. Didn't you want to see what would happen when the mana compressor exploded? Here, I'll let you see. In a motion that rendered it impossible for me to react, he pressed his hands against my shoulders and held my body firmly against the side of the wall. My expression changed at that moment, and Prince Plintus shouted, "Watch." Boom. Immediately after that, there was a terrifying explosion and everything around me turned white. Chapter 780 Taking Over 3. If one were to use a word to describe how the situation beneath the tower was, it'd be slaughter. The large hall of the tower was filled with blood, and the agonized screams of the demons could be heard continuously ringing out from within the space. Orc. What was supposed to be a trap in which they would find their way to slay the current leader of humanity instead turned out to be a slaughter for the demons. Things weren't supposed to be this way. Spurta. No. Sparks of electricity were seen flying through the air, and blood was seen accompanying each spark. The next thing that appeared after the sparks were a couple of yellow streaks. They came forth immediately from Liam's eyes as they surveyed the entirety of the battlefield in front of him. There was something distinctively different about him today. Whenever his gaze settled, a number of demons would fall from the sky and not long after turn into powder. It seemed as though his form was constantly fading into and reappearing in front of a demon before reverting back to a blurry state. When he moved through an area, blood would spatter and a demon would be killed. He was like a god of death, and he garnered the attention of those around him. Who is he? Have you seen him somewhere before? Since when did we have someone this strong and yet not know anything about them? Within the hall, conversations began to take place as everyone's attention was drawn to Liam, who was sneaking his way through the demons and dispatching them in a matter of moments. Because of the uproar his actions caused, even Octavius and the highest-ranking officers of what was formerly the Union took notice of what was going on. Why have I never heard of him? Even Octavius was taken aback by the scene that unfolded in front of his very eyes. At first glance, he was able to tell that the man before him was not an ordinary person but rather someone whose rank had reached the SS rank. Having just recovered his feelings and retained most of his memories, Octavius was shocked to know that he had no clue as to who the young man was. Where did such a monster appear from? Even though everyone else was talking about him, the individual in question, Liam, seemed to be thinking about something entirely different. I can see it. Sparks flew all around the area that he was in as his eyes performed a low scan of the area that he was in. His vision began to blur, and he suddenly found himself standing in front of another demon. He brandished his sword and swept his eyes across the demon's body before settling on a specific location, which he then stabbed directly in the middle of. Arc. Spurta. The speed with which he moved was so great that the demon did not even have the opportunity to respond before it was immediately reduced to powder. However, the thing that surprised everyone the most about the scenario was that right after Liam defeated one demon, his body twisted, and he suddenly found himself standing in front of another demon. The same thing repeated itself and his body turned into dust. Liam just stood there staring into space as the demon in front of him disintegrated into powder. The unexpected turn of events completely caught him off guard and everything appeared strange to him. This was the first time he had ever felt this way and he couldn't quite explain it. Whenever he raised his head, he'd see the demons. But what especially took most of his attention were the thin blue projections that would appear beside them. The projections were an exact copy of them. The only difference was in where they were placed. When a demon ran, their projection would appear just a little bit ahead of them, and when they flew, their projection would appear just a little bit ahead of where they were going. That was fine. But what was most shocking were the projections that were in a completely different position from where the demons were headed. Liam was initially confused about it, but once he saw the demons turn their bodies and move directly into the same position as where the projection was, he finally understood what was going on. I can predict their movements. It was a rather simple conclusion. One that seemed to be the most logical given the situation, and yet, Liam found himself unable to process it properly. Baffled him. When he turned his head to look around, he noticed that time had slowed down and blue projections had appeared in front of everyone. The world started to turn gray, and he noticed that the mana in his body was quickly depleting. Because of how quickly it happened, by the time a couple of seconds had passed, more than half of his mana had been depleted. But that didn't matter to him. The only thing that mattered to him was whether or not what he was seeing was true. And as soon as he stopped channeling his mana and saw everyone move in the direction of their respective projection, his mind blanked. It's true. He wasn't imagining things. It turned out that he could accurately predict everyone's movements, and the revelation stunned him. At that precise moment, more than a dozen questions popped into his head. How is this possible? Since when did I gain such an ability? Is this something that belongs to my art? Is this because I suddenly gain my memories again? Is this my true potential? Ugh. Liam groaned, massaging his head. He felt his head throb, but at the same time he felt his heart palpitate with an unusual form of excitement, one that he'd only felt a couple of times in the recent past. The most recent one occurred when he was facing off against Rin in the demon realm. He was absolutely ecstatic, and the sparks that were already flying around his body began to crackle and pop with even greater intensity as he relished on the sensation that he hadn't anticipated he would feel again so soon. Cracka, cracka, cracka. As he gradually removed his sword from its sheath, a powerful force emanated from it, and everyone's attention turned toward him once more. He grinned. Come. What's up with Liam? Hein looked into the distance in shock. Even though he had always been aware for a very long time that Liam was powerful, the events that were taking place right now puzzled him to a much greater degree. Has he been holding back in training? He who had trained with him over the past few years was baffled by what Liam was currently showing. He had originally thought he knew his strength, but looking at him now, dancing around the demons, he felt his whole world collapse. Bang! Right at that moment, something incredibly heavy slammed into his shield. The force of the impact caused his entire body to shake, but he did not move even an inch from where he was standing. Focus. Han Yufei's voice rang from behind him. Following this, Hein heard a whistling sound and a fist hurled past his ear. Hey, watch it. Hein hastily moved his head to the side and covered his right ear. Fuck, that hurts. Stop being a crybaby. Ava's voice echoed just a few meters ahead and Hein's face turned bitter. When he turned his head to look at her, he noticed that she was surrounded by more than a dozen distinct animals, all of which were displaying a rather threatening aura. These beasts ranged in size from large elephants with multiple tusks to lions and tigers that were only half the size of those elephants. If there was someone else who was attracting just as much attention as Liam, it'd be her. She alone was managing over a dozen different demons, and not only was she not getting pushed back, but she was even killing them. Bang! Ugh. As yet another strong force struck his shield, Hein let out a brief groan as the force caused the shield to vibrate violently. He cocked his head to the side and glared angrily in the direction of the aggressor. It originated from a demoness who ranked in the Marquis range and sported a massive broadsword in her hands. Hein's face turned a bit strange at the sight. How should he say this? She and the sword looked completely incompatible. Not only was it twice as big as she was, but it also looked like it was too heavy for her. Or so it seemed. Bang! Raising the broadsword again, it smacked once more against his shield. The trembling spread throughout Hein's entire body, and he came dangerously close to retreating. It was a relief that, as a result of all of his training, he was now able to stop himself from moving, and despite the fact that his entire body hurt, he was able to persevere despite the discomfort. I think it's enough. I can go all out now. When Hein looked around and saw that there was no one else behind him, he sighed in relief. Now that everyone was gone and he no longer needed to tank, he decided to launch an all-out attack. But just as he was about to do so, the entire room shook violently. Rumble I. Rumble I. What's going on? While Hein was able to keep his balance, a great number of other people were unable to do so, and as a result several people fell. Hein instinctively raised his head and looked upward after sensing a particular kind of energy emanating from above him. He wasn't the only one, as many of the stronger people did the same. What's goy? Bome. He never got to finish that sentence. Chapter 781 Taking Over 4. Cuckoo, ha. Prince Plintus. I'd say he had lost it completely. His maniacal laugh reverberated throughout the entire area that the two of us were in as his hands pressed even more firmly on my shoulders, pinning me into place. When he turned his head, the spot where the mana compressor had been, came into his field of vision, and his gaze lingered there for a moment. It had only been a few moments ago when it had blown up into pieces, and as a direct result of the explosion, the entire building had begun to shake. A sizable portal could be seen hovering over the location that formerly housed the mana compressor before it was destroyed. Wome. The area around the portal began to warp, and the demonic energy that had been released into the atmosphere as a consequence of the explosion of the mana compressor began to rush in the direction of the portal, which was at the same time beginning to grow in size. Have a look. Take a look at what you've done. Prince Plintus seemed to be entranced by what he was seeing. He no longer seemed as calm and collected as the first time I saw him, and from what I was seeing he had completely lost it. His eyes were the best evidence of this, as they were rather hazy. This, because of what you've done. This is because you pushed me to this point. If you had just obediently let yourself fall in my hands, none of this would have happened. He's completely lost it. After what seemed like an eternity, Prince Plintus turned his head, and our gazes once again locked. His eyes, which appeared to be even cloudier than they had been before, turned red and bloodshot. Come witness. Witness the consequences of your actions. Witness how everyone that you care about and the forces of the human domain are whipped. This is the third time. Unable to take it anymore, I spoke up. Raising my head, I directly stared into his eyes. This is the third time. I repeated, feeling more annoyed than before. As I turned my head and stared at the hands that were gripping my shoulders, I decided to channel my demonic energy, and scales began to cover my face. Father. My muscles bulged as a result, and my power started to increase drastically. If before Prince Plintus was letting out more energy than me, then now we were about even. Oh, I could tell. I had the edge at the moment. My unexpected actions appeared to have alarmed the prince, as evidenced by the sudden opening of his eyes. You, what are you doing? First things first. I paid no attention to him as I placed both of my hands on his forearms and began to apply pressure. Yuka. The moment I applied pressure, the prince let out a piercing scream, and his head jerked in the opposite direction. This is not enough? After noticing that his hands were still firmly placed against my shoulders, I increased the amount of force that I was applying, and the prince finally released my shoulders. Waka! The sound that came out of his mouth after I applied some pressure over his arm brought to mind the sound of a chicken being strangled or something similar. I didn't have much time to pay attention to the sound he was making, nor was I interested. Swoosh. Swoosh. Arc. Cook. The portal that was only a few meters away from it was currently diverting all of my attention, especially as monsters started to emerge from it. Even though they weren't very powerful, I could tell at a glance that they were just one of the thousands more that were about to make their way into the tower from the portal. Haha, it's already happening. Now that the portal is open, you can't stop it. It's the fourth time. Crack. His hands broke as a result of the additional pressure I applied to his forearms. Ha! The prince let out another agonized cry. He struggled under my grasp, seemingly trying his best to get out of it, but it was a futile attempt. Not only was I a lot stronger than I used to be, but because he had used up a lot of his demonic energy trying to open the portal, he was a lot weaker than he was when he was in the height of his power. I was the one who had the advantage. If I had to make an educated guess about his power right now, I would say that he was roughly on par with Octavius in terms of his ability. He wasn't a threat. You speak a lot of nonsense. I spoke, staring directly at the prince in my hands. His face was pale and he had a fierce expression on his face. If looks could kill, I'd be dead more than a dozen times already. Unfortunately, however, looks couldn't kill quite as easily as one would think, and I found his glare to be nothing short of amusing. You think that the situation is dire? When I turned my head back to look at the portal, the corners of my mouth turned up into a smile. Navi. I shook my head, soon letting go of his forearms. You. The moment I let go of his hands, the prince looked at me in shock. I made use of that opportunity to move my hand forward toward his lower abdomen and gently place it there. My hand was covered in a white film, and the speed at which it moved increased 1,000 times over. It was so fast that he had no time to react. I went all out. Spurta. Uck. Blood spurted out and his eyes opened widely. When he turned his head to look at me, he had a look on his face that conveyed complete and utter surprise. He seemed unable to comprehend what had just taken place, but I didn't bother to explain it to him because I quickly retrieved his core. Thump. His body began to sag, and the soles of his feet began to char and smoke before turning into black ambers that rose in the air. He was in terrible shape. While his eyes continued to be fixed on me, I fidgeted with the core in my hand. There's something that you seem to have completely misunderstood about the matter. I looked back at the prince, who seemed to be struggling to understand what I was trying to say. He at most has a minute left before he disappears. Even though his core had not been damaged now that it was outside of his body, it would quickly disintegrate, and he would not regain consciousness until a new body had been formed. This was something that Angelica had mentioned to me a while ago, and I decided to put this information to use by heading in the direction of the portal that was gradually growing larger right in front of my eyes. The prince's eyes tracked my every move as I moved around. Whoa. Wawa. After casting a single glance, all of the monsters that had been materializing in front of the gate vanished, and I came to a stop in front of the dungeon. As I slowly extended my hand in front of me, a bright white glow began to appear on it. The white glow suddenly erupted into a shower of golden runes and scribbles, which then began to descend like chains in front of me and head toward the portal. Wame. The gate, which only seconds before had appeared to be reasonably stable, began to shake uncontrollably almost immediately. Right when yet another monster was about to appear, the gate disintegrated into dust, and the opening began to contract. You see this? I turned my head to stare at Prince Plintus, whose gaze was fixed on me with a look of utter disbelief. His already pale face turned a shade paler and his entire body trembled. As he struggled to comprehend what had transpired, the ambers that were rising from beneath his body and consuming what was there grew even more numerous, almost covering his entire body. His mouth opened a couple of times, seemingly trying to say something, but he seemed to be struggling to do so as nothing came out of his mouth. Even so, I knew exactly what he wanted to say and I smiled as a result. Impossible. I almost laughed, turning my gaze toward the laws that were moving around my palm. It was moving a lot more smoothly than it had in the past, and I had significantly improved my control over it compared to the first time that I had used them. Dungeons. Gates. Everything originates from one source. There were many types of forces in the world, but only one trumped all of them. The Akashic laws. They were the origin of all power and the driving force behind everything. Everything, including mana and demonic energy, originated from the laws, and despite the fact that demonic energy was antagonistic toward the laws, it was still a force that originated from them. The only reason demonic energy was so rejected was most likely due to Jezebeth and his actions. It was the only thing I could think of to explain the situation. Glancing at the prince, I continued to speak. Not many can wield this power. It's not something that's meant to be wielded by anyone and probably shouldn't. Even so, I brought my hand toward the portal and slowly clenched it. Shumei. The golden runes that were encircling the portal started to shrink, and the portal quickly shrank down and transformed into a small ball of energy. As the air around it became chaotically twisted from the mana that was erupting from it, I beckoned it with my hand and brought it to my mouth. Gulp. I swallowed the orb and muttered. To those that wield it, they can do anything.